afternoon to everyone here, and welcome to our Changemaker20. I just want to thank you guys for spending your afternoons with us. And if this is your first time, this is our platform where we do get to chat with our subject matter experts in an open forum for all of you guys to ask questions and a chance for you to get to speak to them directly. And so, Catherine, we were just talking a little bit earlier, but for everyone else, just head on to the chat down below and make sure to always send not just to panelists, but to panelists and to attendees, as we'd love to hear from you and love to get your guys' questions. And so today we have Melanie Parish. Melanie is a public speaker, author, and a master coach. She is an expert in problem solving, constraints management, operations, and brand development. Melanie has consulted and coached organizations ranging from Fortune 50 to IT startups. As an author, educator, and creator of the Experimental Leader book, Melanie shows people new ways of thinking about their leadership, informed by her understanding of the fast-paced ride of technology and technological innovation. So 2 weeks ago, we discussed the effects of COVID with Melanie and how organizations were really forced to burn their strategic plans overnight and really just start experimenting. And so, Melanie, I remember just starting to read your book as well, and I really like the approach that you take. As opposed to having just a set way of going about things, you take a very flexible approach, really incorporating what works, what doesn't work, and really finding a person's strengths and working with that, which I think is super, super interesting. Maybe we can give everybody a quick recap on what is an experimental leader, and we can go from there.
Absolutely, and thanks for having me, Daniel. It's really fun to be here. I think the heart of being an experimental leader is to have a more curious approach. It's adopting a scientist's mindset and opening both communication channels and the flow of ideas so that many people are working on the problems of the organization. There's lots of steps to doing that and lots of ways to get there, but that's sort of the heart of it, is it's applying the scientist mindset to leadership to make more things possible, and to, instead of being maybe a top-down leader where you're a command and control kind of leader where you tell everybody what to do, it's opening up where lots of people have ideas and lots of people share those ideas. Because then we have everyone's brain in the organization functioning to innovate, to create, to solve the problems that we're facing, especially today.
Yeah, and I think the last time we really went into depth on the aspects of emotional leadership, as well as just overall how much you can manage when it comes to experimenting, and what is your risk, how to be as risk adverse as you can. So I think if you really want to go more into that, you can check out our replay. But for today, I kind of want to touch a little bit more on the difficulties of leadership. I remember the last time you mentioned what reactive leadership is and how many of us emulate leadership on a reactive level. People only really see our reactionary outcomes. And so as a leader, how do you build that self-awareness and to really understand and know yourself first?
I think that's a really great question. The times that I see people acting as reactive leaders is when they're scared and they don't know what else to do. So when we become leaders for the first time, often we're really great individual contributors, and then someone, our boss looks at us and says, "Oh my gosh, you're really good at what you do. Maybe you could lead people." And usually we've had no pathway to becoming good at that. And all of a sudden you're leading people and you're in charge of making plans or managing a budget or all sorts of things. And so in that, if you look around for people to emulate, it's just human nature. We often see people's reactive leadership behaviors and even emulate those because we have no metric for deciding if someone's a good leader or a bad leader. We know that we feel like they're a leader, and often I call it the dominant leader or the dad leader, that sort of all-knowing leader that tells everybody what to do. Sometimes that's the one that we pick out first to try. And it gets in our way, and it keeps us from listening and hearing the ideas of lots of people.
And so let's say you're rather new in a leadership position. How can you really find self-awareness of where you're at? What kind of leadership that you are emulating, and really how to steer yourself in the right direction?
Well, I think, there's all sorts of information out there on emotional intelligence and those kinds of things. But those sort of lack vision, because you can also feel like you might be becoming a soft leader if you're just trying to be more emotionally intelligent. Where's the direction? So I think it's important to be clear about, sort of what the mission is of the organization and to steer people there. You have to steer them to something.
Mm-hmm.
I also think that you can nurture your own curiosity. It helps you be a natural delegator. So if somebody comes to you with a problem for you to make a decision on, instead of making that decision, you can actually use curiosity. Hey, what do you want to try next?
Mm-hmm.
When will you come back and tell me what you learned from that experiment? So that curiosity can be without a lot of shifting or deciding. Curiosity can really help you shift things to the people below you, that other people start carrying the load.
Mm-hmm. And oftentimes, as we get into those positions and as we develop ourselves to build that self-awareness, but also to develop our leadership styles, oftentimes we find that we're working an uphill battle. We've already kind of, I guess, have a little bit of skirmishes here and there with people's personalities, and you kind of feel like you're now working against time because people are just now emotionally engaged, and you're having a little bit of a difficult time communicating. And so I remember you spoke a little bit about how you felt that your team was on a similar position. Can you explain to us maybe how that came to be and how you maybe felt, and then maybe how you approached that situation?
Sure. So this was many years ago, and the example you're talking about is actually my big failure as a leader. And I think that I didn't have a clear plan. It's what led to me creating the experimental leader way of thinking and the book, because I was so sad that no matter how hard I tried, my team just didn't. I didn't get my team and they didn't get me. Mm-hmm. And I didn't have a roadmap for them. And so I flat out failed as a leader in, this is early in my career, but I flat out failed. I didn't have a clear roadmap for my success as a leader. So it was a lot like flavor of the month. I knew I was failing, so I kept trying new things. And those things just didn't work. It didn't work because there wasn't a substantial piece. I didn't understand what I was bringing to the role. I didn't have a true north. So I think it's important for people to get a true north, the mission of the organization, how they want to help people be there. The organizational values often are a really good clue about how to lead in an organization. Mm-hmm. If people come first, that's a really good touchstone for leadership. If technology is important, that's a really good touchstone for decision making as a leader. So I feel like both the mission and the values of the organization are a good place to start. And then to apply curiosity and the mindset of an experimental leader will help you find a path through insanity right now, but whatever it is that's happening on your journey.
And it's like you mentioned, a lot of people start with a good foundation, but it isn't until I think most times it's pressure that really cause a person to deter from that. And so what do you find are the pitfalls leaders run into when they do feel that they're really under pressure to innovate, particularly now during these times where innovation is so key?
Well, I do think that sometimes the biggest challenge is somebody above you who's leading with a reactive leadership style. I worked with a team that was a software startup, and they had a leader who would call people into the office to find out who to blame and then would yell at them. Mm-hmm. And that behavior reverberated throughout the organization all the time. Nobody was safe to try things because at any moment, if they failed, they would get blamed, and then they weren't really big on firing, mostly just yelling. So it wasn't even effective. They weren't even showing them the door. But I think that those sorts of reactive leadership styles, sometimes coming from above, can be the biggest challenge as you're trying to find your own good leadership style. I do think that being really transparent, like, hey, when you yell, it feels like this, and I'm wondering if there's another way. I always remind people when I'm coaching them that if they are encountering a reactive leadership style above them, that person is scared and they don't know what to do. That really helps me dealing with people who yell or who, you know, are mad or who want to blame or those kinds of things, because it reminds me that they're reactive like that from a very, very vulnerable place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, I mean, what are some other ways that a person who maybe is below them can really help maybe the person above? Can they approach it differently? Can they, is there something that they can do to really help position that person better? Like what are ways that we can really work with those situations?
I think that question that you just asked is a great question to ask up. How can I take some of the pressure off of you? What could I do to alleviate some of the pressure? That, you know, it's so clear you have so much on your shoulders. How can I help alleviate that? That's a great question to ask. The other trick is that the people that are using that really dominant reactive leadership style are often big squish balls. So if you go to them and you say, oh my goodness, you know, it hurts my feelings when you yell at me. My daughter's a chef, and she encounters this leadership style regularly in kitchens with head chefs. And she learned early in her career, she was terrified of them early on. And then she started to learn that if she just went to them and said, you know, hey, when you yell at me, it makes me feel really bad and I don't like my job. They're big squish balls. And they would all go, oh, I'm so sorry. And then it would shift. And she could actually change it by sort of naming it in a really non-reactive way.
I mean, a kitchen is definitely a tough place to work. I mean, I've also heard my fair share of stories how pots and pans would get thrown at some chefs, and they just kind of have to duck and then saute. So definitely, I can definitely see where she's coming from with that. You also mentioned that loneliness is a huge factor to some leadership. Can you talk a little bit more about the loneliness that some leaders might feel?
Yeah, I think getting promoted, sometimes you lose your friends in an organization if you're an internal promotion, or you go to a new organization and you don't want to get together with your coworkers and tell them how unsure you are because you don't know who's safe yet. But even long-term leaders take on, you know, the emotional labor, they put things on their shoulders and walk around with them. That's the role. And doing that is really lonely work. Mm-hmm. I have talked to so many leaders over the years who have just shared how lonely it feels to hold the goals and dreams of an organization as they work. Mm-hmm. And I think there's some really key ways to alleviate that suffering. One is just, you know, radical self-care. Mm-hmm. I think that radical self-care can really help people put themselves first. Being a leader, you're by definition not putting yourself first. You're putting the needs of the organization first. Mm-hmm. I do find it a bit challenging during the pandemic to, you know, do the things I might normally recommend, like massage or chiropractic or a pedicure or, you know, going for a run in the park. Like, there's so many things that I see my clients struggling with right now, because it's just hard to find those things. Even people who had good strategies before the last 8 weeks, those strategies are flagging a little bit right now.
Mm-hmm. And so it sounds like there's a level of vulnerability that a leader should have with their team, and it's really gauging what the right level is and knowing who they can and shouldn't talk to about certain things, obviously in levels of respect, and don't want your team to worry about certain things. And so what is and how can you really gauge that? Like, what is I guess a pattern you can look for, some guideline that you can look to?
I think the question about vulnerability is really interesting. It's not something that's in my book, so I'm happy to talk about it, but I'm talking a little bit off the cuff, so I wanted to say that out loud. I think you're exactly right in that getting the right level of vulnerability is really important. I always think that hiring a coach is a great way to be safe in the way that you share, so that you can be vulnerable with a coach and not with your boss or the people that report to you. I think that there's a certain amount of appropriate vulnerability that really goes a long way. So saying, I'm unsure of how we're going to go forward, but I know we're going to experiment in these key areas. Notice when I say that, there's like a definite approach while I say, I don't know. And you don't want a leader, nobody wants a leader who just says, I have no idea what to do right now. If they don't say, but we're going to figure it out, you leave people in uncertainty. And that can actually cause harm. They become afraid. They worry their jobs will go away. And so I do believe there's a responsibility to responsible vulnerability is important.
It's a great term. You should definitely coin that, responsible vulnerability. It's the first time I've heard of it, and it sounds great. It sounds like it's very effective, and it's a good way to look at things. And so, Melanie, maybe you can just leave us off with one last thing, just essentially how a person can, maybe one thing that they can start doing today to help position themselves into becoming a more experimental leader.
Sure. The thing I always say is just start with curiosity. And when people come to you with challenges, say, what are you going to try next? And when will you show me what you tried? And then when they come back to you, you say, what did you learn? And what will you try next? So you just start getting them on the path to iterating. Just that one thing of saying, we know we're conducting an experiment. You don't have to live and die on your idea. Just tell me what you're going to try. It frees up so much space in the organization for people to iterate and try new things without having to have the perfect idea right out of the gate.
That's perfect. And so, Melanie, thank you for sharing, and thank you for being a little bit off the cuff. I know we went through a lot of depth in our first conversation with Andrea, and we went a little bit more into your book, and today we kind of talked a little bit about broader leadership. And so thank you for working with me on that, and I think it was great and a lot of wonderful content. I just also want to thank everybody who tuned in today for our Changemaker20, as this is all the time that we have. But if you guys do have any further questions or want to check out that first version, it is on YouTube. Just look up Talk Boutique, and Melanie is one of the few faces that come up first. But if you guys can't get enough of her and want to book her for a custom virtual event or for her services, definitely shoot me an email, and I'd love to get you connected. We will also be continuing our virtual speaker series with another changemaker, with Stefan Palios, this Thursday. In this session, we will be tackling the question of inclusion that goes into diversity, but now also remote. And so what are the new challenges many are facing as we move towards this inevitable future? Can diversity and working remote be synonymous? So these are the kind of questions that we will be tackling. And so I'm looking forward to that on Thursday. Once again, Melanie, thank you for coming in today. And for everyone at home, stay safe, stay healthy, stay connected, and we'll talk soon. Take care.
Thank you.